like never before at Bed Bath & Beyond's Warehouse Clearout.
In Stamford, Connecticut, a team of novice heroes called the New Warriors are filming a reality show. They have found 4 villains in a hideout and are ready to strike. The villains are Cobalt Man, Coldheart, Speed Freak, and Nitro, all of whom are fairly heavy hitters in the supervillain community with a great deal of credibility. Knowing this will put them on the map as superheroes, the New Warriors eagerly move in. They are able to take out most of the villains, but Nitro flees to a safe house. Fortunately, Namorita is able to stop the villain by pinning him to a school bus. Ugh, Namorita, right? Aren't you the submariner's cousin or something? Well, I'm afraid you are not the bargain basement losers you guys are used to, baby. You're playing with the big boys now. Captain America and Iron Man stand over the wreckage of what was once the peaceful community of Stamford. The casualties are in the hundreds, many of which are children. The heroes are doing what they can to help the survivors. As he clears some debris, Goliath mentions that this may have been the straw that broke the camel's back. With all the superhero business over the years, coupled with recent events like the Hulk trashing Las Vegas, things have reached a boiling point in America. The giant hero is worried there will be a witch hunt, and Miss Marvel has a hard time faulting the people. After all, who could justify this? Shortly after, Tony Stark attends a funeral for a boy killed during the Stamford attack. At the end of the ceremony, the boy's mother spits in his face. She is furious that the hero is showing up here, and blames him for encouraging vigilantism, going so far as to say her son's blood is on his hands. Within the onlooking crowd, J. Jonah Jameson orders Peter Parker to make sure he's getting all of this on camera. Elsewhere, the Human Torch tries to visit a nightclub. Some of the people waiting in line jeer the hero, and when he gets into an argument with them, he is knocked down and violently attacked by the crowd, putting him in a hospital. As the public is rapidly turning against the heroes they once looked up to, the president announces proposals to reform how the government treats superpowered individuals. As a result, a group of superheroes gathered together in the Baxter Building in order to discuss what to do. While heroes like Luke Cage and the Falcon are vocally against the proposed reforms, which will essentially turn heroes into civil servants, others, like Iron Man and the Yellow Jacket, express support for a superhero government program. Spider-Man points out this would mean publicly revealing the identity of heroes, and while this may be okay for the Fantastic Four, things like that are a much more serious concern to somebody like him. When the Yellow Jacket points out that everyone is being a bit paranoid, Daredevil says things have been building to this for a long time. Stamford means the end of vigilantism as they know it. On board the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, Captain America is approached by Commander Hill. She informs Rogers of the meeting happening down in the Baxter Building and asks for his thoughts on the matter. Rogers replies that he doesn't feel it is his place to judge, but when pressed, he admits he thinks the president's plan will split the superhero community down the middle. It's going to mean war. The S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are annoyed at this, balking at the idea that anybody would object to training and paying superheroes, and ask the captain to estimate how many rebels they can expect. Steve guesses there will be a few, mostly concentrated around street-level heroes like Daredevil and Luke Cage. Maria asks if he can handle them, and Rogers refuses to even entertain the thought. He will not arrest people risking life and limb for this country. The two get into a heated argument, and pretty soon, Captain America is surrounded by S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, all specifically trained and geared for fighting superheroes. Though Rogers tries to talk everyone down, calling this insane and begging Maria not to go through with this, the S.H.I.E.L.D. commander refuses to relent and orders her men to attack. Steve jumps into action, knocking 2 of the soldiers out, and using the man to block a series of tranquilizer shots. Moving fast, he beats the men down one by one before knocking a group of them over with his shield and charging through a window. Blocking a stream of bullets from shield agents, Captain America falls clear of the helicarrier. He lands on a fighter jet and scares the living daylights out of a pilot. Using this aircraft, Steve Rogers is able to make an escape. Down in the Baxter building, the heroes are disturbed by the appearance of the Watcher, who only appears to record moments of great change and upheaval. His presence here does not bode well. Over in DC, the President and his cabinet discuss recent events. Captain America going underground means that every hero that disagrees with their plan now has a leader and a symbol to rally behind. But Tony Stark asked the President to proceed with his reforms. He, Reed Richards, and Hank Pym will handle Captain America. Later, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents find the Vulture and Grim Reaper beaten and tied to a post. They are 2 of 15 supercriminals that have been trussed up for them by Captain America. Commander Hill knows this means their nightmare scenario has come to pass. Rogers can't be on his own anymore. Meanwhile, Iron Man forms his team called the Mighty Avengers, and they are enjoying a vast improvement in public opinion. The people cheer them on as they save New York City from an attacking doom bomb. Over in Baxter Building, Reed Richards is working tenaciously at Tony's plans for the superhero community. He's excited for what is to come, as he has been working on projections for the human race. This is the only way to deal with the ever-increasing population of super beings without things ending in disaster. Susan notices a disc labeled 42 and asks her husband what it means. Reed refuses to tell her. She leaves, going to visit her brother at the hospital, and Reed asks her to give Johnny his regards. Over in the Daily Bugle, J. Jonah Jameson is told that Tony is holding a big press conference out of town. Ben Urich is available, but Peter Parker is not. Jonah is hardly paying attention to any of this. At midnight tonight, everything this paper has ever campaigned for is officially becoming law. There will be no more masks or excuses about secret identities. The heroes will answer to the government or be thrown in jail. Later that night, Tony sits in his penthouse. He prays he is doing the right thing. At midnight, the Superhero Registration Act becomes law. 24 hours later, the Young Avengers are arrested for refusing to surrender to the government. As they are taken away by the authorities, one of the guards talks to the driver of the prison transportation unit. The guard is shocked that the kids are so young and running around in leggings, acting like cops, going on to mention that these creeps are in for a rude awakening when they see number 42, a prison being constructed for those who refuse to cooperate. The driver says this guard talks too much and knocks the man out of the vehicle. Steve Rogers and Sam Wilson are on the scene, ready to rescue the Young Avengers. Wilson frees a young superhero named Wiccan, who begins to cast a teleportation spell. As Steve evades S.H.I.E.L.D. helicopters, the spell completes and everyone escapes. The Young Avengers are taken to an old S.H.I.E.L.D. safe house, unknown to any except for Nick Fury himself, and Rogers welcomes the young heroes into the Resistance. Daredevil gives the heroes new secret identities so they will be able to operate without being found out by the government. Before the Young Avengers can settle in, Dagger interrupts them and says that everyone might want to watch as Tony Stark begins his big press conference. During the event, Tony introduces Miriam Sharp, the mother that confronted him earlier at the funeral. He says it is her that sparked his passion for the federal employment of all superheroes. He also introduces Spider-Man, who has something to say. The hero is nervous at first, but begins by saying most people watching probably know he has kept his secret identity carefully hidden over the years. But after talking things over with his family, he's decided to do this. The Registration Act gives everyone a choice: let their powers go unchecked, or go legitimate and earn some public faith. He's not wearing this mask because he's ashamed of what he does. He's proud of it, and he's here today to prove it. His name is Peter Parker, and he's been Spider-Man since he was 15 years old. J. Jonah Jameson collapses to the floor. Following this, Reed Richards meets with Black Panther in Wakanda to discuss these recent events. T'Challa is shocked that Reed is asking him to help police the United States and to hunt down his fellow heroes. He briskly refuses, even after Reed says that the president personally requested this. When T'Challa asks about Johnny, Reed replies he hasn't checked in a day or two, but Susan hasn't left his side. As Reed comments on the beauty of Wakanda, the Black Panther quietly advises Reed to call his wife. Back in New York, Dr. Strange's servant, Wong, informs Yellow Jacket and Wasp that his master is not interested in supporting Tony Stark's plan, and has got into seclusion. Over in Westchester, Tony meets with Emma Frost. The conversation quickly turns bitter, as neither side is happy with one another. With the X-Men declaring neutrality on the issue of registration, Tony feels they should help in order to improve the public image of mutants, mentioning all the families that died in Stamford. Emma is insulted, feeling she is being threatened with the genocide of others, pointing out that the Avengers did nothing when Genosha burned. Stark leaves, but Frost promises that though they will not help him, they have no intention of joining forces with Captain America either. As he goes to his car, Tony is approached by Bishop, who wants to talk. Meanwhile, Captain America has formed his team of heroes into a group called the Secret Avengers. Included among their ranks is the likes of Daredevil, Cable, Falcon, and Hercules. They are all called into action when a petrochemical plant catches on fire. The heroes assemble, but are surprised when they don't find any workers present on the scene. Cable notices that the plant is a subsidiary of Stark Industries, and realizes all too late this is a trap. Cloak and Wiccan, the Rebellion's two teleporters, are suddenly knocked out by tranquilizers, and Iron Man's team moves in. Tony and Steve square off, but Iron Man doesn't want to fight. He makes Rogers one final offer of amnesty, which Captain America instantly refuses. Spider-Man tries to talk everyone down, but Steve just reprimands the hero and asks if Mary Jane is happy now that Sandman has their postal code. Iron Man still advocates for them resolving this peacefully, pointing out their long-standing alliance and friendship, and asking for a chance to explain his plans. Looking around, Captain America shakes Tony's hand and says he has 5 minutes. Peter cheers out in relief, but Iron Man sees that Steve planted a device on his hand, disabling his armor and allowing Steve to knock him down. Goliath is the first who jumps into action, trying to hold off Tony's team to allow the Resistance a chance to escape, but Hank Pym is quick to match him, and soon a violent fight begins between the gigantic heroes. Chaos erupts as both sides attack one another. Spider-Man proves more than capable in this fight, thanks to his upgraded Iron Spider armor courtesy of Tony Stark, and he buys Tony enough time to reboot his Iron Man tech. Now repowered, Tony attacks Steve, and the two men come to blows. Hercules flies into a rage, calling Iron Man's side traitors and knocking them back. Monitoring this, Maria Hill decides it is time to deploy codename Lightning. Everyone looks on in shock at Thor's presence, as the hero was thought dead. He attacks the heroes who falter at his might. Dagger realizes how wrong this all is and says they need to get out of here now. Thor replies that nobody is going anywhere. Beaten and broken, Captain America refuses to surrender, so Tony orders his team to activate their audio blocks, and Stark unleashes a massive sonic strike. The entire Resistance falls to the ground, unable to move, and S.H.I.E.L.D. gets ready to arrest the captive heroes. Suddenly, Iron Man detects a non-human attack, and Hercules throws a tank of gas at him. The sonic attack powers down thanks to this, and Cap's heroes are able to leap back into the fight. Falcon saves the now unconscious Captain America and orders the team to get ready to flee. Goliath easily brushes off some incoming S.H.I.E.L.D. agents before squaring up against Thor himself. But the God of Thunder has other ideas. Bill Foster falls to the ground dead, and the heroes gather together to try and escape. However, Thor isn't finished and he attacks once more. Susan saves the heroes with a barrier and orders them to get out of here. Cable interfaces with Cloak's mind and is able to initiate a teleport. As they disappear, Sam thanks Susan. Things get quiet for a moment before Reed orders a shutdown of Thor, while the Yellow Jacket flies into a rage, saying their creation was supposed to have safety checks in place to prevent him from killing. Peter comments that Tony said he knew what he was doing, and nobody else was supposed to get hurt. Uatu looks on, saddened by these events. The mood is no better in Avengers Tower, where Thor is being examined. Yellow Jacket is deeply hurt by this turn of events. He and Tony helped Reed clone Thor with the strain of the god's hair that Stark has kept since the first meeting of the Avengers. Hank struggles to understand a man who combs his furniture for hair follicles and skin cells. He also just can't understand what is wrong with the Thor clone, and wonders if it is missing a human conscience. As Peter looks on at the clone's dead eyes, he openly wonders if he's fighting for the right side. Tony's people are disappearing by the hour, but thanks to Stark's trap, half of the secret Avengers have been captured and taken to the 42 complex. Captain America says they're not going to let the other side get away with this, but Cable is uncertain they can beat Thor. Rogers explains that couldn't have been Thor, as he knows his old friend wouldn't murder Goliath. Regardless, not all the heroes are convinced they can do this anymore, and two of them, Cassie Lang and Nighthawk, leave to join Tony's side, while Cable bows out of the war entirely. As they leave, they are watched by a masked figure. Later, Goliath's funeral is held. His body couldn't be shrunk back down, so Tony personally bought 38 burial plots and handled all of the expenses for the ceremony, thinking it was the least he could do. He is approached by Miriam Sharp, who offers her condolences. She knows Tony has lost a lot of support, but wanted to encourage the man, saying it is not Stark's fault. She gives him a gift, her late son's favorite toy since he was 3 years old, to remind Tony why he's doing this. Tony's allies also attend this funeral, and Reed notices that Peter has been acting very suspiciously lately. He neglects to see a similar change in his own wife. Johnny is out of the hospital, but Susan is not happy. She's ashamed of her husband, and ashamed of herself for supporting his plans. She's decided to leave and join Captain America's Secret Avengers. She makes it clear in a note to her husband that this is not a cry for attention. Rather, she feels that Reed's hands are soaked in blood, and he's too blinded by projections and projects to even see it. Her and Johnny are going underground, but there's no place for the children, so she's leaving them in Reed's care. Not wanting their last memory together to be tainted, she prepared one last meal for them to share together before leaving. She says she still loves him, and begs him to fix this. Susan isn't the only hero to leave the mighty Avengers, and Tony's side has trouble recuperating from this loss in allies. Though a couple of Cap's heroes change sides, the balance is firmly tipped in the favor of the Resistance. So the mighty Avengers decide to assemble a new iteration of the Thunderbolts. Reed makes it clear this is strictly a temporary measure in order to capture the Secret Avengers. Each and every one of them will be chipped, tagged, and monitored by microscopic nanobots. Because these guys, well, they're not very nice people. Over at Stark Tower, Nighthawk and Cassie Lang settle into the new roles as government agents. They are supposed to meet with Tony Stark, but something is keeping him busy upstairs. Peter Parker has just told his friend that he's leaving the Avengers. Iron Man says that Peter is behaving like a lunatic, but Spider-Man refuses to back down. He's learned that Prison 42 is a secret camp hidden within the Negative Zone that does not treat its prisoners well. And between that and what happened with Bill Foster, Peter knows Tony is in over his head. Stark tries to explain himself, pointing out that going back to the good old days was never on the table, and claiming he's doing what just needs to be done. Peter is unmoved and demands that Tony gets out of his way. When Stark asks about Mary Jane, Peter knocks his former friend through a wall, saying his wife and Aunt May are as far away from all of this as they can be. The two men express disappointment in one another, and Peter tries to escape through the window. However, he is unsuccessful due to the reinforced glass of the Avengers Tower. Luckily, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents burst through the door and open fire, shattering the window in spite of Tony's protests. Peter flees into the streets of New York. Maria Hill contacts Tony and decides to deploy the Thunderbolts, even though Stark wants to talk to Spider-Man first. She refuses Tony's request, commenting that she never trusted Spider-Man to begin with. Peter manages to escape into the sewers, but S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are able to track him down, and sends two of their operatives in to pursue him. Jester and Jack-O-Lantern strike out at Peter, poisoning him with gas, and badly injuring him with an explosive. Spider-Man becomes dazed and drugged from the attacks, and the villains are eager to beat the hero to a pulp. But the monitoring S.H.I.E.L.D. agents threaten to take the villains out if they do so. Suddenly, both attackers fall dead. Peter is confused and can barely see, but he recognizes his savior. Frank Castle brings Peter into the Resistance. The others are shocked that the Punisher is helping them out, but Castle explains that he joined them when Tony started recruiting thieves and known killers to his side. Though the others are not happy about this, he reveals that he's been the masked figure following them around in the past few weeks, and points out that they need all the help they can get. Steve Rogers considers these words and whether or not he even wants the Punisher's help. During this time, Tigra covertly makes a call to Tony Stark. Over in Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil is captured by the pro-registration team. As the vigilante is being taken away, Reed is visibly discouraged by his own actions, talking about how Hank has doped himself up on antidepressants to cope with all they've done, while Susan is just gone. She-Hulk encourages her fellow heroes, saying they're giving their friends a future by doing this. Daredevil is taken to the negative zone and is to be held with the other heroes in Prison 42. As Tony drops him off, he wants to have a word with the hero, but Daredevil has barely spoken to anyone. They did find a silver dollar under his tongue, which he claims is for Tony. Stark is confused, and Daredevil finally speaks up, saying that Tony now has 31 pieces of silver. As he is taken away, the vigilante calls him the superhero Judas, and hopes he sleeps well. It will all be over soon. In a S.H.I.E.L.D. base within Arizona, Hank Pym is testing out a new team of champions with Maria Hill. These heroes will be protecting California as part of Tony's 50 States initiative. The plan is to have 50 teams of superheroes for all 50 states. They are carefully screening heroes and making sure local authorities give them complete approval. The public needs superheroes they can count on. They need to do this right, or not at all. Hank is called away by a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent over some issues with the champions. Though the agent doesn't say much, he does manage to annoy Commander Hill. Tony calls Reed. Thor clone has apparently been fixed, and Reed is quite confident he can no longer kill. It should be ready for the final fight the pro-registration side has planned out. Reed mentions that he told the president he wouldn't participate any further unless he had a guarantee that Sue and Johnny wouldn't be arrested. In the end, the president agreed to give 12 people immunity, while everybody else is to be prosecuted. Iron Man is confident he can get even more leeway when he has dinner with the man shortly from now. Unknown to both men, the Punisher is currently infiltrating the Baxter building using a high-tech suit. He is able to break into a data access point and downloads all their information on Prison 42. The facility has more protection on it than anything Frank has ever seen, but Rogers is confident he'll be able to handle things. Deep in the ocean, Susan approaches Namor. She asks for aid in the battle against Iron Man's team, stating everyone else has turned them down. Namor isn't interested in this request, and instead plays games with Susan. The submariner is unconcerned with struggles on the surface worlds. He only cares about the death of his cousin, Namorita, and the killer has been dealt with privately thanks to the actions of Wolverine. When Susan points out that Captain America is one of his oldest friends, Namor retorts that Rogers isn't even here. He's insulted that Steve sent Susan instead, and feels he's being taken advantage of, that Rogers is using the unique relationship between Susan and Namor to try and exploit the submariner's emotions. Though Susan claims they don't have a relationship together, Namor says he can feel her heartbeat in the water, and it tells a very different story from the lies coming from her lips. Back in the Secret Avengers bunker, Spider-Man is back in his original suit and is feeling much better. The team is preparing an assault on Prison 42 to rescue their fellow rebellious superheroes. The hero Diamondback announces they have new allies as well, 2 villains named Goldbug and Plunderer, who are as unhappy with Stark's plans as the rest of the Secret Avengers. However, Frank shoots them down, not seeing them as any different from any other supervillain. In a rage, Captain America begins viciously beating the Punisher down. Frank refuses to fight back against Steve Rogers out of respect for the man, so Cap gives up and throws him off the team. Over in Stamford, Stark meets with Miriam to celebrate the opening of a memorial in honor of all the lost children. She thanks Tony for all he's done, regretting how much it personally cost the hero. Far away, at the North Pole, Doctor Strange meditates. He's approached by Uatu, who asks if the Sorcerer Supreme is not tempted to end things once and for all. It would only take a gesture or a whisper from Stephen to end all of this, but Stephen says this is precisely why he must remain above this battle. There is no right or wrong here, only different perspectives. It is not his place to intervene. The Watcher is more than familiar with such a dilemma. And Doctor Strange replies that he only wants whatever side to win that will better serve mankind, and spill the least amount of blood. In the Prison 42 complex, the guards are suddenly knocked out. Joined by Black Panther and his wife Storm, the Secret Avengers begin an assault on the prison. But Peter's spider sense tells him something is terribly wrong. The pro-registration heroes appear in front of them, ready for a fight. Tony announces Steve has walked into yet another trap. The rebels are outnumbered 10-1, and Stark says now is a good time to discuss the terms of Cap's surrender. Steve replies that he knew Tigra was informing Tony of what was going on, as they weren't the only team with an informer. Hank confesses he's been telling Cap about everything, and that he's really the young adventurer shapeshifter known as Hulkling. The hero was able to disguise himself as Hank Pym after they captured him in Arizona, and he has been spying on the pro-registration side ever since then. Hulkling was able to mimic everything about Hank, including his biometric readings. Using this, he has freed every single captured hero in 42. With their numbers bolstered, the odds have been evened out, and the two sides prepare for the final battle. Rogers says Tony's side should close their eyes. This might hurt a little. The battle begins and it is fierce. Bishop is knocked down by Captain America, while Dagger and Black Panther are able to sneak into the control center of Prison 42 in order to prepare an exit from the negative zone. Peter tries to attack Tony only to be tackled to the ground by a couple of the villains. Black Panther is able to open up a window for their escape, and Cloak manages to pull off one of the biggest teleportations he's ever done. In an instant, the entire force of both sides are transported to the skies above New York City. Stopping their fighting for a moment, all the flying heroes grab a friend, and when everybody is safely transported to the ground, New York goes into a state of bedlam as the heroes resume their battle. Spider-Man springs into action, taking out 4 of Tony's people at once. Reed says this is amazing, but Peter corrects him. He's spectacular. Elsewhere, Cap is surrounded by villains who begin to savagely beat the hero. They are confused when he starts to laugh, and Rogers explains he's thinking about how badly they're about to get their butts kicked. Imperious Rex! With Namor and the Atlanteans on the scene, She-Hulk assumes the worst. As things stand, they have no chance of winning this fight. However, Tony isn't worried as he has backup too, and the Thor clone, with an army of initiative heroes in tow, move in to strike. The battle rages on until Tony and Cap find one another among the chaos. As they square off, Cap has one more trick up his sleeve. Vision appears behind Tony and disables the man's armor, and Steve is able to knock the hero down. The clone of Thor moves in to help, but he is stopped by Hercules. Susan is then surprised to see Ben Grimm has joined the fight too, but the Thing says he's not sitting this one out before declaring they have people to protect. When Taskmaster tries to strike Susan down, Reed blocks the attack. Mr. Fantastic collapses from this blast, and Susan flies into a rage, crushing the villain under a force field. Meanwhile, Hercules has had enough. He is outraged that this clone would dare wear the flesh of Odin's son. He takes the clone's hammer, claiming he knew the real Thor. Calling the clone an imposter, he shouts, "Thou art no Thor!" Captain America is winning this fight. Unable to move, Tony must lay there as Steve slowly shatters his armor with his shield. Just as he's about to finish Stark off, he hesitates for a moment before he is tackled to the ground by civilians. Steve asks them to stop, saying he doesn't want to hurt them, but they reply it is too late. Looking around at the badly damaged city, Steve drops his shield. In tears, he realizes these people are right. They aren't fighting for the public anymore, they're just fighting. His fellow teammates are shocked, pointing out they're winning here. Steve says they are indeed winning everything except for the argument. He takes off his mask and surrenders to 2 police officers as Steve Rogers. He orders his troops to stand down, while the man who once called himself Captain America is arrested. In the aftermath, the Punisher picks up Rogers' discarded mask among the ruins of a badly damaged New York City. 2 weeks later, everything begins to recover. In the wake of Captain America's surrender, all heroes who fought on his side are offered amnesty. Most of them accept this offer and join the 50 States Initiative, which Tony has launched in full to massive public approval. The people have even accepted the need for Prison 42, which has resumed housing both villains and vigilantes that refuse to cooperate. Not everyone has accepted this so easily. Some heroes have moved to Canada to join the new Omega Flight in the hopes of starting a life free from registration, while a small band of Cap's followers have gone underground as a new team of Avengers. On the whole, registration has been declared a success. What once seemed like the darkest hour in superhero history has become their greatest opportunity. The heroes have moved on from tackling just law and order to every problem ranging from the environment to global poverty, while the president has put Tony in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. All this means very little to Reed Richards without Susan beside him. He sends her a message begging her to come back. He promises no more traps, no more clones, no more terrible things. As Reed stares out the window, he is surprised to find Susan returning home. Tony is offered a new role as Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and accepts it, feeling that it fits nicely. Miriam joins him on the helicarrier to congratulate him on all he's done and all he's earned. She tells him he's a good man and thanks him. People will finally be able to believe in heroes again. And that's a good start. Hello and welcome to Comic Island. My name is Arden and this is the complete story of Civil War. Okay, so this is the part where I review this comic, but honestly it's gonna be a little tough. This is one of the most polarizing, if not the most polarizing comic ever to be made. Some people love it, while others think it is utter nonsense. So where do I fall? Well, personally I love this story. 10 years ago I was finishing up high school when a friend of mine started showing me these Civil War comics. Up until then I had never really taken much of an interest in comic books. But as I started reading Civil War and a handful of other cool comics, I really started to fall in love with them. Civil War ended up being one of the major reasons I ever started reading comics at all. I couldn't get enough of it. I read every single tie into the story, a feat I can ascribe to only a small handful of other comic book events like this. It got me really interested in this media, and I started to enjoy comics more and more. So Civil War will always hold a special place in my heart. I think part of it is that it's a very fun premise for a story, and part of the reason it's so great for getting into comics is the idea behind it tells you a lot about the heroes and what side they wind up on. You learn a lot about characters you aren't necessarily familiar with. Sure, back in 2006 I knew who Spider-Man, Captain America, and Iron Man were, but back then I couldn't tell you the first thing about characters like Spider-Woman, Cable, or the Yellow Jacket. But like I said, you learn a lot about the characters pretty quickly by their decisions. And once you see what side each character falls on, you get a sense of who they are and what they stand for. It makes the story very accessible and useful for new readers, and back then, it really helped me get a handle on the Marvel Universe. Even now, after all these years, I still think it's a very useful story for new readers. So to people like me, who started reading comics when Civil War came out, this becomes one of the more important comics that we've ever read. And I'm sure most of you have similar experiences with other stories. Most fans I talk to have something that got them interested in comics in the first place, and as such, it's a story they're going to have a lot of reverence for. So it was really fun for me to come back to my story, and with Civil War 2 coming out in comic books this year, coupled with Captain America Civil War hitting theaters in April, it felt like a great time to talk about the original story that started all of this. So, knowing all of this, let's talk about what I thought about Civil War 10 years after first reading it. Well, honestly, I still think it's a pretty good comic. Now, I've seen a lot of reviewers on both YouTube and news sites who tend to look back on this story less favorably. And I know at least some of our own viewers aren't a fan of this comic either. They're not wrong either. Civil War is very much flawed. The story is written by Mark Millar, and he has a bit of a reputation of being a writer who's better at ideas over execution, and that's kind of what is happening here. Civil War is a great idea, but does have trouble with its execution. The biggest problem has to be the way the story treats half of its characters. The leadership behind the registration side, namely Reed Richards, Iron Man, and even Hank Pym, they all come across as pretty terrible people in this story. They turn on their friends and family, create a prison which by all accounts is nightmarish, and turn one of their best friends, who at the time had died fairly recently, into an evil clone. For most of the story and many of the tie-ins, many of these characters come off as the antagonists of Civil War. Most critics seem to focus on Iron Man, but honestly, it feels like Reed Richards comes off as the most unlikable person in this entire operation. He treats his family like they're a distraction, is the most responsible for the business behind Prison 42 and the Thor clone, and by the end of this story has made so many bad decisions that when Susan returns to him, I'm left feeling like he almost doesn't deserve her. His character more than anything else feels like it's really out of step with the Reed Richards we see in practically any other story. Iron Man doesn't fare much better, but at least in the first half of Civil War, you see why he's doing what he's doing and what's driving it. He thinks he's making the best of a bad situation, and I do get where he's coming from. Mark Millar uses the character of Miriam Shark quite effectively to illustrate this. Even then, by the end of the story, Tony feels like he's gone too far. And when you consider the fact that Stark never really apologized or made amends to Thor or Steve for what he does here, it makes his character seem far less likable. And many others like Uatu, Spider-Man, and Cable, to name a few, often feel like they're behaving out of character, either saying or do things that don't feel quite in sync with their established backgrounds. A lot of Civil War seems to involve this thing I'm going to call backwards writing. I get the impression Miller came up with cool ideas for the story and then made excuses for those cool ideas to happen after the fact, rather than figuring out what characters would naturally do in any given situation. Coupled with this, there are other problems with some of the writing being a little too repetitive or just plain silly, but in my opinion these other problems are minor and never too bad to ruin the entire story. In fact, these flaws as a whole, real as they may be, aren't enough to make this story terrible in my opinion, especially when you consider Civil War's strengths. Steve McNiven's art throughout this core series elevates the title. He does a great job with both facial expressions, conveying action, and even going so far as to show Stanford as this unmitigated disaster that it is. It goes a long way to making the story look and feel both great and profoundly epic. There's also a lot of merit to this story. In spite of all of Miller's flaws with his writing, he really is touching on a lot of cool ideas here. For example, I really like the idea of the 50 States Initiative. Yeah, it's silly for a state like California to get the same level of protection as, say, North Dakota, but that's exactly the point. It's just the sort of thing that sounds good and feels good that the government would likely put forward to make people feel better. Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense from a strategic perspective, but the people would support it, and that's exactly the sort of paradoxical nonsense you'd expect out of a modern government in this particular story. I don't know if this was done on purpose, but I appreciate the idea of it nevertheless. On the whole, Miller's writing really shines in setting up great moments of action, and like I said, the story is an excellent way for new readers to get into comics. It should also be noted that Civil War really influenced the state of the comic book industry for the next 10 years, both in and outside of continuity. Things would never be the same in the world of Marvel for years to come, as the Superhero Registration Act would have been made in law for a long time until it was eventually repealed after Siege. Even then, the rift that formed between Tony and Steve never really felt like it healed, and the two men, once close friends, didn't quite seem to fully trust each other after this. It was a formative comic in the modern era, and still, 10 years later, has a lot of influence on the current state of affairs within the Marvel Universe. Behind the scenes, Civil War also set the tone for the modern era of comics more than any other story. For better or worse, Marvel and DC started to see the value of these more serious stories and big crossover events. Like it or not, the comic set the trend that still defines the comic book industry to this day. The story has significance, and it's the kind of thing that's going to matter when we consider the history of comic books. It's the exact type of thing that years from now people will refer to in order to understand how we conceptualized ideas and stories back in 2006, and how the comic book industry changed because of it. I also think it's an interesting story with some real political thought behind it. I mean, it's not exactly a political dissertation on the merits of freedom versus security, but it explores these ideas in a pretty interesting way. It's still a comic about superheroes that mostly focuses on cool action above all else, as it should, but there are larger things going on here. The tones, themes, and imagery of Civil War is perhaps one of the best examples of post-9/11 media, and the general mindset of America at the time. And for this reason alone, I think this comic is important and worth our time and consideration. You may have also noticed that when I was talking about the flaws of Civil War, I didn't really mention the ending, even though many other reviewers have a problem with it. I actually like the ending though. Upon reading it a second time, I think it's more clever than people give it credit for. See, I think some people get the impression that the tone of the ending and the fact that Tony's side wins implies that Miller is saying that Tony's side was right all along. But I don't really think that's the case. After all, Captain America's side basically won the war. They had them on the ropes. And if you read Steve's dialogue, he makes it pretty clear that he doesn't surrender because he thinks Tony is right, or because some random civilians don't support him that he is somehow wrong. He surrenders because they aren't fighting for anything anymore. In his eyes, they're just fighting. What was Cap's endgame here if he won the final battle? Was he going to arrest Tony? S.H.I.E.L.D. wouldn't accept that. Was he going to capture the heroes? That seems like a liability and it wouldn't change anything. Was he going to kill him? That really doesn't sound like Steve Rogers to me. This was the problem Steve faced, and I think in that moment he realized he wasn't going to accomplish anything through the war. The better thing would be just to refuse to cooperate with the Superhero Registration Act, become a political prisoner, and try to win over people through thoughts and ideas over violence and action. Of course, that didn't really work out because he was assassinated shortly after this, but hopefully you get the idea. As for the relatively happy ending for the pro-registration side, well yeah, of course they would celebrate and be happy, but it doesn't make them right. I don't think that's what this comic was saying. So those who decry the ending for supporting Tony's side even though they probably didn't deserve it, in my opinion are being a little bit superficial with their judgment. There's more going on here than one might think, and though the ending is a bit anticlimactic and far from perfect, I did, on the whole, enjoy it. So there, those are my overly long and complicated feelings regarding Civil War. My final verdict as I consider all of this, well, I think Civil War is a decent story which has left a huge impact on a lot of people. And it's worth reading and considering for yourself. It is flawed, don't get me wrong, there are problems here. but the story is not without value. It has merit. If anything, the fact that it still had such an impact on people in spite of all these problems is a pretty good justification for doing a Civil War 2. Yeah, reading the original Civil War has left me pretty excited for Marvel's big 2016 comic book event. The story will be helmed with Brian Michael Bendis and David Marquez, an excellent creative team that showed us very recently how likable and fun they can make Tony Stark. And I really think Civil War is the perfect story for Marvel to take another crack at. The original was a fun but flawed idea, and maybe they can address some of these problems and tell a better story overall. So I'm really looking forward to that, and I hope you do too. And that's about it. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check out all our complete stories available at comicisland.org. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep reading comics.
Welcome, fellow masters. My name is Musaki, and today we are going to another episode of Clairvoyance EX, a look into the next month so we can know exactly what to expect. Let's not waste any more time, let's just jump into it. Now before we get started, we're gonna go ahead and talk about this episode's sponsored, Opera GX. That's right, Opera GX is back and is here to tell you all about their specially made browser. Opera GX is a special version of Opera built specifically for gamers, with a version available on the PC as well as mobile. I've actually been using Opera GX for quite some time and it's actually become my main browser, mainly because of the feature they have called GX Control. GX Control actually helps you enhance your performance on your PC while gaming with the browser open so you can get rid of lag. You can control the CPU, the RAM, and even network bandwidth, letting you use the browser that you want to while gaming how you want to. Also, it allows for integrations with Twitch, Discord, and more. So that way I don't have to actually have Discord open, I can just log into Discord right here on the browser and have access to it. So if that sounds like something that you want to give a try, go ahead and click that link down in the description and in the pinned comment. That will allow you to download Opera GX completely for free. And like I said before, it's a version for the computer and mobile, so that link will work for either one. And trust me guys, once you give this a shot, you won't regret it. Now back to the video. Just to understand the state of Clairvoyance EX, I do have to clarify something here. It's actually been noted by Lasangle that they want to move forward Lost Bolt 5.5 toward the end of November. Why does this matter? Well, originally Lost Bolt 5.5 actually happened in December on the GP server. That means they're actually accelerating a little bit more than they normally would. This is going to give time for other campaigns to want to do later down the line, and specifically Thanksgiving, but this means that we're going to receive things a lot faster. Case in point, the Land of Shadow event is currently going on. So that being the case, everything that we expected to happen in September is already happening. So now we got to expect some things that are going to come in October on the JP side of things. That being the case, Hunting Quest Part 9 is what you should expect to happen in September. For day number 1, we have Soulless Hunting, which is good for chains. Day number 2, Night Enforcers. These are good for metals. Day number 3, Valkyrie Hunting with the golems as well. So you're gonna get Aurora Steel and Octuplet Crystals. Day number 4, Giant Mecha Demon Boars. You're gonna get the reactor cores and gears from the dolls. Day number 5, Demon Hunting. You get the parts of a foreign god and spinal fluid here. And lastly, Hydra hunting quest, which lasts for 2 days. You get the divine wine and the horseshoes from the centaurs. Pick whatever day that you need the items for the most and farm that as much as you can. I highly doubt that you need exactly every single thing here, and after farming as much as you did in the lottery event, you don't want to burn yourself out. So just pick a day or two, farm those out, and you should be all set. Next up, we have a Guda Guda summoning campaign. Now this is definitely very interesting, as this is one of Okita's few raid-up banners, as well as Hijikata and Okada Iza. The reason that this banner came up before is because of setting up for Guda Guda, because the next Guda Guda event will be happening soon. On top of that, Okita and Hijikata both get their strengthening quests here. If I were to theory craft here, this could possibly be retooled to be a back to school campaign. Tucson actually introduced this banner last year. Normally, around September, there's a convention that happens in Japan, and normally there's a Japanese series of service put on them. But because of COVID that happened 2 years ago, that convention didn't happen. And so this is just a normal Guda Guda summoning campaign. They could definitely still do that, but I still see a back to school campaign banner happening around the same time, especially considering last year it was received very well. Bias aside, if you need an excellent single target saber, Okita is very good, and this buff is actually very good for her. Hijikata Tojizo's buff actually puts him in a way better spot. It makes him way more consistent than he was before, putting him way better than he was before, and maybe even raising his tier a bit. But you may want to hold on to your quartz for just a bit, because Guda Guda Yamatai Koku is the next event that's going to happen in September. This event is the next story in the Guda Guda chapter, and it is a Shinsengumi focused story. You already know I'm all about it now. It's a very mishmash type of event. It combines the island creation from the first summer event with at least a third of the missions from the mission event, with raids coming later. It's definitely something that's going to require a bit more in-depth, but is not too hard to figure out what you need to do. You've played multiple of these types of events before in the past. They just decided to mission match them all together. But you do need to be aware of a couple of things with this event. Mainly the summoning campaign. We have Himiko, who is a fantastic Buster Crit support ruler, who also can offset as DPS, with Saito Hajime, a limited 4-star saber that I am in love. And if you love Virgil means, you'll love Saito Hajime. But that's not the only limited unit. We have Oda Nobukatsu as a limited 1-star unit in the Friend Point Gacha. So, the only way to get Nobukatsu is to roll him in the Friend Point Gacha. Yes, he is mostly a support for Nobu, but he is still a limited unit, and you're gonna want to grab him if you can. He gets raid ups usually every time there's a Guda event. Still, if you have the friend points, roll. Try to get 5 copies if you can. And one of the best parts about this Guda Guda event is that it's a very low bar to entry. Only just clear Fuyuki and you're good to go. So I highly suggest every single player participate in this event, regardless of where your account stands, and get Nobukatsu. Use as many friend points as you have to get Nobukatsu. And as far as the banner's concerned, Saito is a very good unit, as well as Himiko. But let me just say, October might be a bit of a harsh one for you if you really want them. But we're not done with the events that happen here, because there is a very, very good chance that we can see the beginning of the Christmas rerun, the one specifically mentioning Nightingale. Like with other rerun lotto events, this event is limited to 10 boxes. So you cannot farm this endlessly like you wanted to. Nope, you stop at 10 and that's it. Honestly, this is going to be for people who really haven't played it the first time, or still need Nightingale, or need any of these items that you see here. Still, I highly recommend that you play this event. 10 boxes isn't necessarily too bad. And we still have the cooperative element for the box lottery, meaning the more boxes you open, the more items that you get later down the line. And yes, you do see that correctly, the Christmas exchange ticket. You either get Chaos Claws, Feathers, or Rings. So if you need any of those, hey, you get multiple of those coffers that you can get those items from. I still think this is worth having, because look at the skill gems. That's right, you get skill gems, and we need skill gems here. So just having that extra skill gems will be great for you. I still think you should go about this, even though we're gonna have another lottery event in December. Albert and Co are definitely trying to stop our clairvoyance, but let me tell you what, I still got you downloaded. I have some ideas of where you might be going, and if you want to try to throw a wrench in it, come on. Because honestly, the more new things you come up with are just going to be beneficial for the community, and I for one welcome them with open arms. And once again, I want to thank the sponsors of this video, Opera GX, for sponsoring this video. So thank you so much. And if you yourself want to try it out, again, just click the link down in the description or in the pinned comment, and you can just download it for free. If you still want to see other videos by me, I have a playlist up here that you can click, or you can check over here for the latest video that we just made. You might want to check that out. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you there.
そろクエストに戻る？いいよ、その代わり